Well, I did want to start today off with a little bit of an announcement, and this is maybe slightly self-serving, but there is a benefit to everyone that's watching today and to the food industry as a whole. If you haven't seen the news, Datassential completed its first acquisition. We brought a company called CHD Expert into the Datassential family. It is now part of the Datassential family. With it, we bring a ton of really great, talented people, not just in the US, but in France and other parts of the world, and basically expands Datassential's global reach in terms of the data that can be offered on operators and eventually other types of food information. With this, we now have available for any company or anyone that's interested, operator data, profiles, location information for over 9 million operators across 60 different countries around the world, and it's available today. So if anyone would have an interest in learning more, we'd love to send you some information about that, but we're super excited to welcome aboard some really, really great talent to Datassential and doing some more stuff, fun stuff, not just in the US, but all around the world. 60 different countries that are covered, so these sort of greenish countries we now have data for, and we'd love to share that with you. So if you have an interest in getting a little bit smarter about what operators are like around the world and what the structure of the food service landscape is, just click yes over here and we'll get you some information. So I'll give you 30, 40 seconds to respond, and then we'll move on with the rest. So I'll tell you a funny story. Actually, no, this takes too long, but I'll tell it to you anyways, because it's a good story. So we live in Florida. We're about 20 minutes away from Palm Beach, which is sort of like the ritzy part of South Florida. And there's a street there called Worth Avenue, which is like their equivalent of Rodeo Drive. And there's a great sandwich shop up there that's not terribly expensive. So we'll drive up, 20 minutes and go to the sandwich shop. And we noticed that every time we drive up Worth Ave, which is sort of fun because you get to see like all the rich people, they're like dressed really rich, they look really rich. It's just fun to do some people watching. We would always see at the plaza these two guys. They look like they're probably in their late 50s, maybe, I'm not quite sure, dressed impeccably, and they're twins on top of it. So you sort of do a double take. And not only are they dressed impeccably, but they are dressed identically, with the exception of the fact that one wears a white shirt and one wears a blue shirt. And when you get there, you see them just standing in the middle of the plaza, each with one raised leg resting on a ledge, and they both stand in that exact position, and you have no idea why. So at first I thought, are these models for a nearby clothing store, because they have all these high-end fashion boutiques there. And I'm like, what is going on? So finally we asked, a shopkeeper nearby, we're like, what's up with those guys? And it's a French woman. I'm gonna do a bad French accent. I don't mean to offend anyone with it. She's like, it is very bizarre. No one knows who they are. They come here every day. It is so bizarre. And I did a little investigation. So they actually go by the name. They're great. They're called the Twins of Buckhead, and they hail from Buckhead, Georgia, where they were doing the same thing, where they'd walk around town together. And one would wear a white shirt, one would wear a blue shirt in the morning, and then they would switch in the afternoon. So the other one wore a blue shirt and the other one wore a white shirt, so no one ever knew who they were. And they have this signature pose where they have a raised leg that they put on a ledge or some other surface, and they just stand there for long periods of time, and people spot them around town and take like Instagram photos with them just because it's like a cool thing to see. It's almost like Where's Waldo? You're shocked that you actually saw it. Is it real? Oh my God, it's real. So if anyone uses Instagram or just even Google the Twins of Buckhead, they're now in Florida, and I couldn't be more excited. So
do they have like is there a hat? Can you donate to them? Like, what's the point?
Go to their Instagram page. So apparently they didn't know what Instagram was, and people were like making pages dedicated to them. And then finally they said, oh, that's what it is. So now they have their own. But look up the Twins of Buckhead, and it is utterly fascinating, right? Like 5 or 6 times in a row, they're just standing there in that pose. I'm like, how long do they stand there for? Like pigeons or something. It was amazing. So, okay.
That's weird.
All right, so let's use chat. Make sure you choose all panelists and attendees, or chat to everyone. That way, everyone can see your messages in Zoom. And Mike, you're going to kick us off by telling us what's going on in the world of food that's wild, that's wacky, or notable and important. What's going on?
Absolutely. So the first one, you might have read about this in Bloomberg News a couple of weeks ago, but this is a startup called Wonder. and it's actually created by the same guy who created Jet.com. So he sold Jet.com to Walmart, and then he created this. And it's kind of a wild take on delivery, which is they partner with restaurant chefs and they actually license brands from restaurant chefs. So it's not like a normal delivery startup where, you know, the restaurant gets a percentage of the cut when they sell something. They actually license the brand from that chef, and then they work with the chef to create food that works on these trucks. And they actually create food in these central commissaries, but they finish them on the truck itself in front of your house before they deliver it. So it's a single person, picks up the food from the commissary, drives it to your house, finishes the food on the curb in front of your house and delivers it to you. So if you read the reviews, it's only in New Jersey right now. It's, you know, they're testing it with a bunch of trucks. They're hoping to have 1,000 trucks by the end of the year, but the reviews are insane. Everybody's like, it's like having my own personal chef. You know, the quality of the food is just fantastic. I think the thing, and I would be curious to hear what people think in the chat, is if this is a sustainable model or not.
So does the person in the truck only make food from one particular restaurant, or do they have to know the food for
each truck is dedicated to each particular restaurant brand.
So that might be workable. Otherwise, it's like there's no way.
Yeah.
But financially, I wonder if the model works, right? That
Exactly,
sounds like it might be a very hard thing to solve for.
But they have legitimate chefs like Marcus Samuelson, Bobby Flay. It's, you know, people that you know, and they also they're kind of you know, a little quiet about how much they've raised. But by some estimates, they've raised about $500 million in investment right now. So it's not a small startup. It's a large
This company's raised, it's been valued at 500 million, or they've raised?
No, that's what I thought too. If you read, it's not valued, raised 500 million. If you look at that, the article, yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Well, you'd have to find, you know, aspiring line cooks. You can't just get, you know, somebody that wants to make a couple extra bucks, you know, doing some sharing economy stuff. You need to find like an aspiring, you know, restaurant cook that wants to drive around and do this.
And that they have that hospitality, because they're also the person coming to your door and, you know, talking to the customer too. Absolutely.
Yeah, you need to train for that, probably.
Amazing.
This is where I feel like some people may have seen this, but it kind of got lost in the news last year, which is that Starbucks, some of their locations were testing animal-free milks. And so it's not the plant-based or the nut milk. Well, so I mean, some of them are plant-based, but it's not nut milks. It's not oat milk or almond milk or soy milk. It literally is those animal-free milks that are trying to mimic, you know, actual milk that, you know, tastes the same, acts the same. They worked with Perfect Day Milk, which is one of these animal-free milk companies. They came up with the barista blend. They have it on the menu at 2 locations around Seattle. They're asking customers to actually take a survey after they try it. Do they like it? Does it taste the same? And we're seeing more and more of these brands. You know, you see more and more launching at CPG in the past few months.
To be clear, this is sort of like milk created through science to be just like the milk that we've all known and loved.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And is animal free? Does that seem like that's the term that's taking in the industry, or is that sort of up for grabs still?
No, yeah, that's definitely up for grabs.
That's interesting. I've not seen that term before. Cool. Smoke Point.
Yeah, and we've talked a couple of times on these webinars about the wildfires in California and how it impacts the wine industry. And a lot of the wineries, you know, if they had grapes that were tainted by smoke, just had to get rid of those grapes or throw the juice away. And so Hangar One, which is the vodka brand out of California, actually said, hey, give us some of those grapes and we'll turn them into vodka. So they've taken grapes, they combine it with grain, they combine it with, I believe they use Merlot grapes and one other type of grape, and they turn it into vodka. And it doesn't taste smoky. One person from Hangar One says, it's almost like somebody in your neighborhood is barbecuing. So there's like a hint of smoke really far away. But it's a very small percentage of their production right now. So bottles are a little bit more expensive, but it is a unique way of kind of using some of these grapes that were impacted by the wildfires.
I think that label actually reminds me more of like the Avengers and Thanos doing his snap and
cool. Well, and you hope it's not a growth area too. You hope there's not a lot more wildfire damaged grapes.
Yeah, you hope, but we'll see. And then in more beverage news, so this is Canna, which at first I thought was a cannabis company, but it's actually a company that is creating hardware that can recreate any drink that you can imagine in your home kitchen. So they, if you think about most beverages are water, and then there's some percentage maybe is sugar and alcohol, and a very small percentage is flavor compounds. So if you want to recreate any of these beverages, all you really need to do is, have those flavor compounds in the machine, and then you combine it with the water, sugar, and alcohol. And so they think they've cracked it. They actually have a hardware prototype. They think it makes pretty much any beverage that you can imagine. They developed a wine where they actually tested it, and people could not differentiate the wine made from their Canna hardware system versus actual wine. And so, it's not just that they want to recreate beverages that we know and love, orange juice, wine, beer, but they want to, in the future, create even new categories of beverages that we've never even imagined before.
This is for your home?
Yeah, well, so it could be, it's very early stages. So they've talked about it as, a home appliance. They've talked about it in restaurants. So, I mean, it's a tabletop appliance, so it could be used in a wide variety of places.
Alcoholic soda stream.
Yeah, exactly. That is what it is. Yeah.
If someone from Canada's watching and wants to send us one to test out, I'd be happy to try it. That's awesome.
It's really cool. It's interesting. I know we talked about on the last webinar about some of these futuristic technologies that allow you to, really talk to or communicate with somebody who's far away. So we talked about, Google's project. Well, this is a different version called Portal. And so they actually developed this for conferences, and now it's moving into offices. But it allows you to actually be a 3D hologram wherever you want to be. So the use case that they talked about was there was a CEO of a watch company. Because of COVID, he couldn't be at a giant watch conference. So they sent this portal system to the conference itself. And he was actually there, showcasing their newest watches as if he's in the room with people. They say it's incredibly realistic, that it pretty much just feels like there's somebody in the room with you behind a sheet of glass, or if there's no glare at all, it doesn't even feel like they're behind glass. They cost $60,000 right now, so they're pretty expensive, but they do rent them out, so they're cheaper. But it just goes to show, how realistic some of this technology that allows us to converse and communicate with people is getting.
Can you imagine if they make one that's like 50 feet tall, and how awesome that would be? That would be the MGM.
Yeah, so this is the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. And so, in other technology news, they're using virtual reality to actually train people and give people a taste of what the job is like before they even apply for a job. So if you're applying for a job at the MGM Grand, maybe you want to be a casino dealer or something, they give you a taste of that job through virtual reality before you even decide to apply. And they said the reason for it is because right now, a lot of people don't understand how difficult hospitality is. I'm sure we've all heard a lot of customers can be kind of ornery right now. And so it gives them a little bit of a taste of that. And you can see if that person actually is okay dealing with it. And then MGM is actually going to open in, I think it's a $9 billion resort in Japan. And it will be the first casino resort in Japan. And so they think it will be good technology for, an employee class who maybe has never, worked in a casino before. Gives them a little taste of what that might be like.
Interesting, right? 2 years ago, it's like, oh, no one's ever going to go into a casino ever again. And now we're going to open up a $9 billion.
$9 billion.
The original Bellagio, I think, was under $2 billion to build. And that was astronomical at the time. Who here is old enough to remember when the MGM was on fire? That's a good way of dating yourself. Yeah, you guys don't. You're too young.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
When that happened?
I think that was probably late 80s, maybe early 90s. No, maybe early 90s. I'm not sure. Someone look it up. But it was definitely on fire at some point. I remember it.
And then this is just a final kind of weird one. So this is Sexy Fish, which actually it's somewhat close to you, Jack. You could go. It's an outpost of a London restaurant, and they're opening today. And it's so over the top. It's just absolutely insane. $20 million of art in this restaurant. They have 10 Damien Hirst sculptures. So if you know the artist Damien Hirst, who's known for putting the sharks in formaldehyde, they have 10 pieces of art from him. You look at the menu, there's no fewer than 5 items on the menu that are described as sexy. So there's a sexy tomahawk steak, there's sexy condiments that you can order. Their cocktail menu, they did a really good job on. So the pumpkin and spice cocktail that you see on the side, every single page of the cocktail menu has an image of that drink on their own dedicated page, but it's so over the top. And you can see it on this next picture, which I feel like is the most over the top example from it.
Oh, wait, what's going on? What?
So this is the men's bathroom at the restaurant. And so it has this giant onyx art octopus that's on the counter there. And then you can see there's a sculpture of Daniel Craig, James Bond's Daniel Craig in the bathroom with you. So, yeah.
Oh, I thought that was the bathroom attendant at first, which was weird.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I did too. Yeah.
So this is called Sexy Fish?
It's Sexy Fish.
And it's sushi primarily?
There's a lot of seafood on the menu. They do have sushi on the menu, but they have everything. They've stayed.
Miami?
Anything that you can imagine.
It's Miami, I assume then, right?
Miami, yeah.
Wow, that is crazy.
It's insane.
Fish. It's like playing Right Said Fred on an endless loop.
I think they serve cocaine.
Interesting. Okay, amazing. With that, I wanted to maybe just transition over for all of you that are using Report Pro. Here are a few things you might want to check out. We have a great new report on virtual brands and what the future of that looks like. A slightly deeper dive into what's happening with labor in food service right now. We're actually going to look at a little bit of that data today as well. And then also just some of the trends that are really starting to heat up and some of the big flavor things that you need to know about as we speed into 2022 and beyond. So check those out in Report Pro. They're fantastic, and check out all the great content in there. There's like well over 1,000 pieces of fantastic reports in Report Pro at this point, with new reports almost every day. And when you're inside of Snap, for all of you that are using Snap, and I think most of you are, you'll see a little banner at the bottom that shows you all the latest content each time you log in as well. Okay, so this is a look at the COVID cases on a 7-day rolling average basis. And you could see on December 2nd, which is when we conducted a survey right at sort of the outset of Omicron before the numbers started spiking, but it was clear that something was going to happen, and it started being talked about a little bit more to understand what consumers, were if they were worried anymore or how are they feeling. And you can see what's happened with the cases since. So they've obviously spiked up like crazy, but they're clearly, coming down just as fast as they rose. The question is, if you look at December 2nd, where the number was, and then what's happened subsequently, and just how much higher the case number has gotten, did we see that manifest in terms of people's behavior around, being concerned about COVID personally, or whether they were willing to go into a restaurant? And here's sort of what we found. So you can look at the December 2nd number, which is before the numbers spiked like crazy in terms of cases. And you could see as of a few days ago in late January, what the numbers are. Percentage of folks that are deeply concerned personally about COVID and their own personal safety hasn't really moved up despite the dramatic increase in cases. And the January 21st number is actually a little bit before the COVID numbers started crashing down the way they have been in the last few days. So this is almost sort of like at the peak of Omicron, you could say. And you don't really see a whole lot more people being concerned about it. So I think there's something in the consumer mentality, which is like, yeah, no matter what I see, I'm probably over it a little bit. I don't know if what you interpret this as, Mark, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I am wondering if the thought of sort of the natural immunity that comes from having had COVID and recovering is kind of behind this a little bit. Because I think that we're gonna see on the next slide too that behavior is kind of holding pretty steady as well. Yeah. So I think that we're gonna be kind of
look at all the cases. I can't get in a restaurant anymore. They've said the opposite, right? The numbers have continued to go down, and we're as low as we were at the very, very outset of COVID at this point. So If we want people in restaurants, it seems like that's moving in the right direction, despite what we've seen with case count. But I think people aren't so concerned about that case number anymore. It's not the standard metric that everyone's looking to. So,
Right.
So when we think about Omicron, so if you remember back, I think it was around December 9th, we did a survey in this group, and we asked all of you, what do you think Omicron, what impact Omicron is going to have on the pandemic, and then, by virtue of that, restaurant recovery and whatnot. And here's the question we asked back then. I actually sort of like to see if our perceptions have changed. We asked on December 9th of last year in this webinar, do you think Omicron will help lift us out of the pandemic? What do you think today? And I'd be curious to see if our numbers have shifted between what we thought on December 9th and what we think today. Mark, Mike, without saying what you think, do you think the numbers have changed, or do you think they're about the same?
My guess is that they will change a little bit, and that we might have a higher percentage of people saying yes.
Yep. Mike, what do you think?
I don't think I could be on the December 9th one, so I don't know what people said before, but I'm assuming that's the direction it went.
Yeah, I would. So I'm going to end the poll here because we have several hundred votes already, and then let's take a look. So will Omicron lift us out of the pandemic? So this is what the numbers were on December 9th, 2021. 40% of you meaning the industry in general on this webinar, said yes, 60% said no. And today, I'm going to share the results of the poll we just did. The numbers are 64% saying yes and 36% saying no. So I think we're all very perceptive, intuitive, smart people. And that's a pretty big jump in our attitude right there. And I think it's reflective of probably what's going to happen. So good news. Okay. Consumers say, Mark, you want to tell us what consumers think about Omicron as well?
Yeah. So in our more recent survey about this, we posed this question to people and gave them sort of a binary choice here, or an explanation of, broadly speaking, the way that we understand Omicron is that it is, compared with previous variants, it's more transmissible, but it appears to be less lethal, and it's causing relatively fewer hospitalizations and deaths. So, that's sort of the baseline consideration here is, okay, Omicron, you may be more likely to catch it, but it may not cause the really worrisome, illness or, risk of hospitalization. So knowing that, what do you think about where we are in the pandemic? It's a lot like the question we asked about, will this bring about the end sooner or later? And about one of five people aren't sure, but people were a little bit more likely to say, well, then we may be farther away from the end of the pandemic than we thought, because this variant is so transmissible.
So what really surprised me that this is where the average person's head was at, because it seems like many of us here think that Omicron will get us closer to the end of this pandemic, and that number has actually increased among this group over the past 6 weeks or so. It was really surprising for me to see the preponderance of consumers actually felt the opposite way. So I will make a semi-controversial statement here and say that I think all of you on this webinar and that represent the food industry, on average, are better informed about COVID than the typical consumer is. So I think that's just the case, but we'll see. We'll see. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyways, we want to understand too what the operator perspective was on not just COVID, but what's happening with their business overall. So we asked a question, which is, what are the biggest operational challenge you currently face as an operator at your location? Mark, what do you see here?
So this is the latest round of numbers from a survey in January, but when we compare it to one that we did in December, same question. The rank order of these things are all kind of the same, but the percentages are all up a little bit. So especially with food cost inflation, rising food costs and the need to make some substitutions, maybe in some cases, switch around suppliers or, look for different ways to get things on or off the menu. That's all up slightly over the past, 30 to 60 days. The labor costs there are still, there's still a concern. I think it's just kind of the background music right now that we've had for, going on more than a year now. And the one that's a little bit more top of mind is the fact that, well, now we're starting to see either really rapid inflation in food costs for certain categories, shortages for some. Broadly, it started out with just difficulty finding proteins, but now, a lot of the other categories are starting to be a little bit more harder to source as well.
So let me ask you a couple of questions. One, were you surprised that food cost was so clearly number one, even ahead of labor?
I was, because I think that when we are, hearing from operators or reading industry trade press or things like that, I feel like the labor shortage is a little bit more top of mind. It's getting, kind of the larger font size and more of the headlines. But when we asked kind of what the biggest challenges were, right now it's food costs, and I guess I would have figured that the supply chain issues are mostly of consumer goods, like all the stuff that's stuck out off the coast of Long Beach on a container ship. I thought it would be things like electronics and clothing, things like that, semiconductors, but we're having the same sorts of problems with raw ingredients and food.
It's interesting too that the food cost numbers at 62%, but inflation's only at 19. When, you would assume that rising food cost is sort of interrelated with inflation, but operators have separated the two concepts in their minds. Somehow they're almost saying like, yeah, I get inflation's bad and it's a thing, but food costs are really bad above and beyond what general inflation might be. I was surprised too to see that there was that much of a distance between food costs and all the labor stuff. And, when we ask operators, hey, where is food inflation most impacting what products you buy and how you plan your menu? It's beef by a long shot, right? Like nothing else is even close. Do you have any observations there, Mark?
Same thing here is that month over month, the rank order is kind of the same. All of the categories are up a little bit. Some of them are down, but it's still the most salient stuff is that it's harder to get proteins right now. And to-go packaging is still really, really hard to source because every operator out there, had to either turn to it for the first time or increase their use of it the past 2 years. So it's hard for, supply to keep up there. And one thing to note here too is that this wasn't a select all question. This was a select one. Like, what is the hardest thing for you to get right now? And so I think that with that in mind, everybody, kind of selling beef in some way, there's a lot more demand for that in a lot of different applications. Not everybody sells chicken wings, but the ones that do, especially right now ahead of the Super Bowl, are going to find it hard to source. But I think everybody has a lot more applications for beef and a lot more demand for to-go packaging.
So tell us what you see here in response to these challenges and what operators think about buying brand names. Look, we've seen for a very long time that operators have year after year said buying name brands matter a little bit less to us and we're more willing to accept private label or distributor exclusive brands. But here we ask the question specifically relative to the current challenges that operators are facing, whether it's labor, food costs, what's happening with COVID. And within that context, it looks like they're saying, even more so than before, we think it's less important to pay for a name brand versus getting something that might be more available or less expensive. Were you surprised at the scale to which we saw a difference here?
I was a little bit surprised that I would have guessed that the much as ever bar would have been a little bit higher, but I think that what surprised me was along the right side of that chart where, the less than before is a little bit lower than I would have thought too. And again, there was a little bit of movement from month to month. I think the biggest thing was that it was well above 50% when we asked this in December for name brand ingredients mattering less. So, and most of that went to the as much as ever response.
Yeah, so it's really like if you're a name brand supplier to the food service industry, and if you're taking price increases, you should also consider what the cost of the next best alternative is to the customer. At some point, it may be too much. Now, if it's a category they don't buy that much of and they still want to buy the best, great. But if it's one of those super prevalent categories that really adds up on their menu, you have more operators thinking, yeah, maybe I don't need to buy the absolute best thing that I've been buying historically. We've also seen some interesting things with labor, right? So, places like McDonald's and Starbucks actually cutting store hours because of the labor shortage and Omicron surge. Why it's a retention crisis as much as a hiring one for restaurants. The 5 most difficult places to hire restaurant staff right now. I mean, we've been talking about this for months, but it certainly continues. And the one thing I wanted to sort of point out is that the labor force participation rate has been generally declining for a while, and it then started picking back up a little bit, right, in like 2015 or so, and it started inching upwards up until early 2020. Then COVID hit, and then labor force participation. So this is the percentage of, people in the country that are having a job or looking for a job. Then that number just dropped dramatically at the outset of COVID. It's bounced back a little bit, but it's not really quite where it was before. And you might say, 1.5%, 61.8 versus 63.3. That's not that much. Well, it is like 5 million people if you think about the number there. It's actually quite significant. So we've sort of shrunk the labor pool in a way because some people just don't want to be a part of it anymore, or have chosen not to be a part of it for, I'm sure very good reasons in many cases. Here's a question for you all. What do you think? Do you think that in the next, let's say, 2 years, will labor force participation rates climb back to their pre-pandemic levels, or do you think they were forever lower? Mark, you're pretty intuitive about this stuff. What do you think? Do you think we'll get back to pre-COVID labor participation levels, or do you think that COVID has dropped this, for a long time?
I mean, two years might be a little soon. I think it will tick back up and eventually reach that rate that we're talking about. You said it's about a 1.5% to make up.
Oh, so you think I should use 5 years or something as in the question instead?
Maybe. I mean, I do think we'll get there. I'm wondering what all the inputs are that kind of go into balance, right? It probably sped up some retirements among baby boomers. So they will, I think, eventually get replaced by, Gen Z, which is going to be an even bigger age cohort, kind of on the rise. And then, I don't know. I mean, I think if family size is kind of dwindling, that might mean, more young people in the workforce instead of dropping out to be caregivers. I don't know how many COVID deaths we're going to end up with before the pandemic is over, but we might crest 1 million pretty soon.
I'll say this. So me personally, I don't think we get back there in 2 years. I don't think we get back there in 5 years. I don't even think we get back there in 10 years. But if you said, will it happen in a generation? Maybe. But I'm sort of, and look, I have nothing but instinct to go off the basis off of, but I think it's going to be a while before. I think we've changed people's mindset in a way that's going to have some pretty lasting impacts, but I guess we'll see. It's a good thing that we continue tracking this number. So, and I think most of you, at least on a 2 year basis, felt the same. 72% think, no, we're not going to get back in 2 years. So I think we have inherently, we're inherently set up for a shortage for quite some time, right? All of the things equal, there's just less people available to do similar quantities of work. But then again, we have robots and stuff, which I'm sure we'll be pitching in.
Yeah, fewer immigrants and fewer, people coming into the country too, which usually kind of made up for some of that backlog.
Yeah. So one thing is, look, there's been a lot of talk about, food service jobs and working as a restaurant employee and how hard of a job it is. It's super, super difficult. I mean, it is like, it's backbreaking. If you're working in the kitchen, you're getting like, all these like burns and it's scars and stuff. It's like hardcore work. So we wanted to ask operators, that are often responsible for hiring people, what are the perceived drawbacks to hourly food service work that makes it harder to maintain or attract a staff? And here are the things they told us. And without talking about the very top item on the list, Mark, can you talk to some of the other items here?
Yeah. I was very, very surprised to see how much of it was dealing not just with wages and pay, but just kind of to your point, the difficulty of the work. It's not easy by any means. So things, unpredictable scheduling, things like difficulties picking up shifts. It's hard to get time off, and then thing I think is the sort of the perception that there might be fewer avenues to growth. So a lot of that just doesn't have much to do with the wage issue.
Yeah. So maybe asking everyone, and take your guess in chat. What's number one on this list? What is the thing that makes it the hardest?
A lot of people are saying pay.
A lot of people are saying pay. So the dollar amount of pay aside, what else makes it hard to keep your staff or to convince people that this is a really great job that you should have?
I saw one person get it. Oh, a couple more people got it now.
Yeah, once you see it, it becomes a cascade, right? So the number one thing is dealing with rude, inappropriate behavior from customers. And hopefully we're all nice to, the people around us at all times, but boy, it seems like sometimes people can be abusive towards their fellow human beings. And I don't know, is it just me, or does it seem like there's been more and more of this, bad customer behavior, not so much in just food, but other industries as well? Does it feel like this has been like increasing in the last couple of years? Airlines will postpone serving alcohol amid surge of in-flight violence, like people getting arrested when they come off the plane now. Flight from Tel Aviv turns around due to disruptive passengers. Airlines forced to discipline customers after 2,500 reports of unruly customers in 2021. And that report, I think, was done at the midpoint of the year. So it probably became a number close to 5,000.
Yeah.
It seems like every time you turn on the news, there's like, sort of I don't know if it's just that we have phones now and you can record people and those videos are being shared. So it seems like there's more of these incidences happening, or if it's always actually, or if it actually has been an increase. I don't know, but the perception is certainly there. So I don't know. Do you think restaurant diners have actually become more rude? What do you all think? I mean, we're all in the industry. Is it your perception and experience that people going to restaurants have become kinder, nicer people, or they have more of them become sort of rude and entitled? I don't know.
It's overwhelming in the chat.
So I'm guessing the chat agrees with what consumers say. Does it? Because consumers say 47 to 13 that yes, I've observed on average restaurant customers have become more rude and inappropriate since the pandemic. Just 13% saying, oh no, they become less rude and they're showing more patience and become nicer human beings. It's a lot more saying they become more rude. Is that sort of where chat has gone as well?
Definitely where chat is going, and we may have received a much different answer had we conducted the survey in April of 2020. But we are way past.
This is when frontline workers were all heroes, and tips were going through the roof. Like people were leaving 100, 200% tips.
Yep.
And then I guess you go back to your old behavior, and even worse in some cases at some point. And if you look at the operator side of things, we asked operators, I think, to agree or disagree with certain statements.
Correct. Yeah.
81% say that operators say that restaurant workers bear the brunt of consumers' frustrations with how COVID affects the country. So imagine that, like everyone's, frustrations with COVID overall is being focused in on restaurant workers serving them and having to take all that on. It's a bear, right? Restaurant workers, but they do agree that restaurant workers are still considered essential workers by the public. These are operators, and that 62% said that most of our customers are acting like the COVID pandemic is already over for them. We might have to break this one out geographically, Mark, to get into it a bit more, but
that's a good call.
Almost 2/3 say that most of their customers are acting as though the pandemic is already over. So what are some of the things that operators have done in the face of not just COVID, but labor challenges and supply chain issues? The green bars are the percentage of operators that have already done this activity. Yellow is percentage that, you know, they haven't done it yet, but they're definitely thinking about it. And the orange is, nah, that's not something I'm really thinking about doing at all. So over half have already taken price increases on their menu, and another 30% are considering it. So overall, about almost 90% have either already raised menu prices or are thinking about raising menu prices. About half have reduced their menu size, and another 20% considering reducing their menu size. So this certainly doesn't mean that they're looking to have a less innovative menu. In fact, what we often see is operators saying we want to do more interesting things, but we can't have as many items on the menu because we don't have as much other people to do that reliably, or we're not just able to get some of the ingredients that we need, or the economics of certain dishes have gotten out of whack for us because of the changes in our ingredient pricing.
Yeah, it would be the time to prune slow sellers right now, I would think. I mean, there's probably never a better opportunity right now to get rid of stuff that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Only 16% say they've invested in new technology or automation. A decent percentage are thinking of doing it. Now, keep in mind, the operators that we polled over here are primarily not national accounts. They're street level operators, restaurants, small chains, hotels, hospitals, schools, CNU, sort of proportionally balanced. But we didn't talk to decision makers at the biggest, let's say 100 national accounts. Over there, you might have more uptake for things like investing in technology and automation because they can do that at scale. And they actually have the capital typically to deploy that a small independent operator couldn't.
And that's where those new robotics companies are targeting right now too. I mean, there just isn't a lot that can be offered to the street right now.
Yeah.
Or not as much.
Well, did this surprise you, Mark? So we asked operators, what's more important to you right now? Taking care of your current customers or trying to bring in new customers?
No, I think this tracks with kind of where we are right now. A lot of about the same number of operators are saying that they just really can't go back toward any sort of dining room restrictions or back to lockdown. We have to sort of maintain what we have now, in this current state of the pandemic. So I think this made sense. It's more of a batten down the hatches kind of attitude right now still.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, in March of sort of like what, May, June, July, summer of 2020, in places like Chicago, we saw, restaurants taking over the sidewalks and streets. I think we saw some of that in 2021 as well, didn't we, Mike? That sort of continued on. Do you think we'll see it in 2022, or is it going to be back to 2019 this year? What's your guess? Mike is frantically looking for that mute button. Mark, what do you think?
What do I think between what and what?
Do you think you're going to have restaurants on the sidewalks and in the middle of streets and stuff again this year, or do you think that's over at this point?
I would think fewer of those. I think that even if they still have the heating lamps and the tents and stuff to do it, they may have fewer people to execute that service. So I can't imagine that the juice is worth the squeeze there.
Yeah, sorry, I could have pressed the unmute button. I don't think we're going to see it at the same levels. I mean, there still are some out there, but we have seen online some of the operators trying to sell some of the greenhouses and things that they purchased. So you already know some are trying to get rid of them. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. I guess
who's in the market for
backyard? That'd be sort of cool to have that set up there. Cool. And that brings us to the topic of tips. And I feel like there's so much more that we'd love to explore on this topic in the future, but we're going to start with some of the essentials around tipping. So this is where consumers say they always expect to tip, right? There's and I would almost say, who are some of these people that don't say they always expect to tip at a casual dining restaurant or a fine dining restaurant? But you can see sort of the general rank order of things. Now, there's a healthy percentage of folks who always expect to tip at fast food places and snack bars and concession stands and places that I think traditionally have not been, tip-prone venues. I feel like something happened when a lot of places switched their point of sale stuff to sort of like the newer, squares and clovers and whatnot, where it's sort of touchscreen for the consumer, and they make it really easy to hit a button and leave a tip. And that certain places where people weren't really accustomed to tipping in the past, we've now normalized that behavior as it being a tipping venue, really because of that device that you're interacting with. I don't know, am I crazy, or do you think we're onto something there?
No, I agree. If you're not the one that has to, for one thing, do the math, and
Right.
actually kind of figure out what 10 or 20 or 15% is, if something just has those three suggestions for you, I think that you get a lot of uptake that way. And I do think that it's a more subtle thing now to be able to tip, in terms of like, getting out change and dropping it in the tip jar, or leaving it in a bill presenter. I think it's an easier and more subtle way to do it these days. So I think that's why there's more uptake.
Yeah, do all of you, I guess, just in chat, feel like you're tipping at more types of places than you used to? Like, I feel like I am. And I know, like, the first few times I'd be like, oh, that's weird. I guess they want me to leave a tip over here. I didn't know you're supposed to. And you're almost like, ooh, they're trying to, like, trick me into tipping. But now when I see it, I'm like, oh, thank you. You just made it easier for me to leave a tip. So I think my behavior has been changed by technology in this case, but I don't know if that's normal. So this is what people tell us, that the average tip amount that consumers in the US say is what they'd want to pay when they receive good service is about 17%, 16.9 to be a little more precise. And you can see on the left how that number changes based on the type of consumer. So there's a couple of interesting ones here. As you might expect at the bottom, people from higher income background that maybe have more discretionary income, they're more likely to say it's a number above 20%, whereas it's about 15 for households earning less than $50,000 a year. And then also people that have at any point in their life worked in food service give a higher number as well. So I don't know how much of that is camaraderie versus like, holy crap, I know just how hard that job actually is and have an appreciation for it. They're more likely to assign a higher number as well. But the ranges still overall are reasonably tight. It's not like one group says 5% and one group says 50%. They all sort of hover around that norm, give or take, 3 or 4 percentage points. There's an interesting thing, and this is not data of ours, but just how many of you have read this book? Perhaps the most important book to read in your business life, and actually I'd say your personal life as well. Influence by Robert Cialdini. Many of you may have read it back even in college or something. The book's like 30, 35 years old at this point, and just filled with really amazing insights about what motivates people to make decisions. And it really boils things down in just a few basic sort of principles. One of them is actually, a few of them are actually embodied in this really interesting study that he references in the book. This study was done, I think, in Ithaca, New York, and I think similar types of studies may have been done elsewhere that come to the same conclusion. It was really about how you could use candy to increase the amount of money that people tip at a restaurant. And here are the conditions. So they bring, people come into a restaurant, and they control for different party sizes and whatnot. So it's sort of like a controlled trial, if you will. And the control group is just the diners that are eating, and at the end they get a check, and then they can write in whatever their tip amount is. So that's the control group. Then you had another group of folks where the server would approach that table at the end of their meal with a basket of mints and offer each diner at the table 1 mint. And when they did that, it increased tips versus the control group by about 3%. So that's actually already a pretty good return on your investment because the mints are not very expensive and you're getting a 3 to 4% lift on tips. Then they did another group where instead of 1 mint, they offered each person at the table 2. They essentially said, normally, because you're such a great person, we're going to offer you 2 mints instead. And when they did that, they saw a much larger increase in the tipped amount that was provided. But the most interesting thing of all is in the third iteration of the experiment, the server would come at the end of the meal and they would bring the basket and say, and give everyone a choice of a mint. And then he would walk away from the table a few steps, and then he'd pivot and turn back around, and he'd said, because you guys are so great, I'm gonna give you each an extra 1. So they still got 2 mints, but they got 1, and then they had a personalized experience from the server and got the other 1, and that led to a further increase of tips. So you could earn a pretty good return on your mint investment in terms of tips if you can personalize that message in some way. So again, not new data of ours, certainly. This is actually a pretty old study, but really fascinating insight into the way the human brain works. So maybe find ways to apply this in your life somehow. I always bring mints with me in my pocket just for this very scenario. I actually don't. I don't do that at all. Okay, so what do people think is the purpose of tipping restaurant workers? That's pretty interesting, right? They're pretty much split. Half of America thinks tips are really a reward for doing your job well, or the server doing their job well, and the other half thinks it's a supplement for because the base pay is really quite low, and you're just sort of making up that difference. I wish, Mark, we had asked about political affiliation as part of this, because I think the split over here would have been pretty interesting too. Not saying one is better or more valid than the other, but pretty sure you would have seen some sort of a correlation over here. But
I'll be poking the bear a little bit.
And here's how people like to tip. So people most prefer to just leave a tip themselves when they're paying with a debit or credit card specifically. I think there was a study that showed when people pay with credit card, they actually tip more than when they pay in cash for the same check size even. Then you go all the way down on the bottom, and the thing that people least like, and I would bet many of you feel the same way, is having an automatic gratuity just automatically added to the bill. People don't like that nearly as much. And you start seeing a lot of stories. So here's one in the New York Times about how eating out has changed by virtue of the pandemic. Really interesting article, from the menu all the way to the tip, and how now some restaurants are adding one less charge, which is essentially an automatic gratuity, because this is more predictable and fairer way of compensating the server. But it's also the thing that consumers broadly are least in favor of, right? That's the least favorable way that consumers actually want to tip, but it seems like there's a push to sort of do more and more of this exact thing. You see headlines where here's a restaurant in Portland, they swaps tipping instead with an automatic service charge in a new employee equity plan. When I live down closer to Miami, if you go to like South Beach or something, most of the restaurants there have an automatic gratuity. And the reason that was told to me, and I have no reason to doubt this, I think it's probably true, they said there were so many people coming over from Europe and non-US countries where tipping was not the standard, that oftentimes tips weren't left because people just didn't realize that that's what was done customarily in this country. So I want to get your thoughts. What do you think about the notion of an automatic gratuity? Do you think overall an automatic gratuity creates less incentive for servers to provide good service? Does it make servers more relaxed, which results in better service? Or does it not really affect motivation one way or the other? I'm not going to ask Mark or Mike what you think. I'm going to ask you to guess what other people think. What do you think the most common answer is?
I am thinking most folks are going to say it'll create less incentive. It'll
Mike?
create less hustle.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be a small kind of weight towards that. But
I think the numbers will be pretty close?
I think so.
Oh, okay. So, Mike, this may surprise you.
Wow.
So most of us that voted thought that it would actually disincentivize quality service. I'm not saying that's the right answer. That's just what many of us currently think. So what do consumers actually think? They're actually a little bit more split on this, with about 40% saying they'd provide less incentive and about almost 40% saying, no, it's going to make people more relaxed, and my service will be better as a result of it. What's really interesting is if you take that top number, that 41% of consumers who think that this will provide less incentive for good service, and you break that out generationally, I was actually very surprised because, I don't know, I'm sure I have this is probably just an extension of my own personal bias. I would have thought that number would have been higher among boomers, but it was actually lowest in the boomer group. I guess it goes to show I don't really understand the way the world works as well as I probably thought I did.
Yeah, I was surprised too. I don't know what my fellow millennials are really saying there.
Yeah, it might be correlated with how attached people feel to their money, right? So, if you're in that millennial age group, like you're sort of in that space where you're accruing wealth still, it's more important. You're not sort of in that spending zone, if you will. You're trying to have like a net increase in money accumulation as opposed to a net outflow at that point. So maybe that changes the way you see parts of the world, but I don't really know exactly what the cause is either. I was surprised by that. And this is perhaps the most interesting thing. So in the US, in the event of remarkably poor service, how might you respond as it relates to tipping? 4% say I'd be so upset that I'd try to ask for the manager to get my meal comped or something. I don't like it when people do that. Some people would say I would pay the bill, but I just would not leave a tip at all if the service was horrible. 43% say I'd pay the bill and just lower the tip. And 19%, 1 out of 5 said, even though it was horrendous service, I would still tip the full amount. But overall, 62%, 2 out of 3 people would still leave a tip in America, even in the event of horrendous service. So it shows you just how ingrained of a behavior this actually is. I think to me, it also shows how it's probably going to be hard to transition us to a culture of automatic gratuity, or at the very least, it's going to take some time to do that. 1, people don't like it. 2, people like the feeling of leaving a tip anyways. It's just so incredibly ingrained. But America is, I think, one of the countries that is like where tipping is most prevalent, all around the world, right? There's many of the countries where it's, not prevalent, or in some words, maybe even considered an insult in some cases. So the US is pretty different from a big chunk of the world in that regard. And I think we're sort of way past our hour. Mark, do you want to say one last thing before we sign off, Mike?
No, I'm actually jumping off. I have a call right now, so I'm going to jump off right now. Thanks, everybody.
And I'm sorry, guys. I should have been watching the clock. But hopefully you found this interesting, and you will stay tuned in 2 weeks, February 17th, same time. It'll be amazing. And I promise not to go over. I promise that every time. I fail every time, but I truly promise not to go over next time. And it'll be great. If you have questions, email your Datassential rep, or just email hello@datassential.com, and we'll get you something fantastic. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you real soon.